Hi, everyone. Welcome. I hope you're all doing very well this evening. My name is Suzanne Mose, and I'm the head of curatorial services here at the Niagara Falls Museums. Before we get moving with tonight's program, I would just like to take a minute to acknowledge that the Niagara region of Ontario is located on the traditional shared territory of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and the Chunatun peoples. The Chunatun peoples have called this land home for thousands of years, and more recently, the Anishinaabe and the Haudenosaunee have been sharing the land as one dish, one spoon treaty territory. So with those very important and relevant words being said, I'd like to thank you all for joining us to kick off our Four Directions Speakers Series. Kickoff being that this is the first of four, so bear with us if we have any technical difficulties tonight. This is the museum's first webinar. So again, thank you all for joining us. This series is the brainchild of Darcy Belanger. Darcy, who works with us here at the museum, is our Indigenous Programs Coordinator. And I can safely say and assure you that without all his hard work and dedication, there's no way that we would all be here this evening. So my deepest gratitude and thanks goes out to Darcy. And I think the last thing you need to hear from me, at least for now, are just a couple of quick housekeeping points. And that's that we ask you to use the Q&A function that you should see either at the top or the bottom of your screen if you have questions and you want to engage with the panelists this evening. We are also going to leave the chat function open. You should see that in the same area. And that's more for if you want to chat between yourselves, other attendees. But again, use the Q&A if you want to talk to our guests this evening. And that's it for me. So now I'm going to hand you over to my colleague, Darcy, who will be your host this evening, introduce you to Karl and Sean. So take it away, Darcy.
Well, thank you very much, Suzanne, and welcome everyone. And thank you for joining us for this evening. It's going to be a great evening. And I would like to welcome Sean Vanderklis. He is from Mississauga of the Curve Lake First Nations, who now, my apologies, who resides here in St. Catharines. I'd like to introduce Karl Dockstader. He is a Haudenosaunee member of the Oneida Bear Clan who lives in Niagara Falls. Together, they host a weekly radio show, One Dish, One Mic, on Niagara's News Talk Radio at 6 a.m., 610 CKTB at 10 a.m. Sunday morning. So please check them out every Sunday. Great conversations. Karl and Sean were recruited podcast together that bloomed into a live weekly show highlighting issues and perspectives that do not always make their way onto other shows. When Karl is not making radio, he works at the Fort Erie Native Friendship Center as the Kijay Nin. I'm a Kind Man Programs Coordinator, which is a great program. When Sean's not making radio, he works as a freelance consultant specializing in policy and issues affecting Indigenous peoples. He also sits on the board directors of the Niagara Regional Native Center. Welcome, guys, and I'm glad you guys are here. And I'm definitely interested in learning more about your journey from the podcast to be on the radio, and even get into conversations of the issues that you face and what do you hear a lot, and meet amazing Indigenous leaders that are coming onto your show as well. So please share a little bit about the start of where you're at now on the weekly talk show.
Good job, Darcy.
Thank you,
man.
Can people hear us?
Yeah, I think they can.
I know. I wish we had a feedback. We had a feedback mechanism. I'm just going to assume that everyone give Darcy a warm round of applause, please, for everything he's done.
Yeah, they're good. There's messages coming in. They could hear us. So
beautiful.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, good stuff. Oh, wow. There we go. That chat's on fire. That's what we like to see. A little bit of feedback. So
yeah.
I think
we're live on Facebook. Oh my goodness, there's a whole conversation happening.
Oh my goodness. Wow.
So fun fact about One Dish, One Mic is we also teach online, and we have still yet to figure out how to use Zoom and the Zoom platform. So bear with us. I think my boss is here, so if she is, I apologize in advance. By the time my contract is done, we'll have it figured out.
Right. So we've actually oh,
I'm going to take executive control and mute Darcy. I'm just joking.
we pre-prepared a couple things tonight. So I think that Sean was going to start off with his story, his personal story. And then I got my personal story and our convergence on One Dish, One Mic. I'm watching the chat right now, and I think that what I'm going to do is figure out how to get on Facebook too. So just ask the questions as they occur to you, and we'll answer them. If we don't hear any questions from you, then we'll just drone on about the things we like to drone on about.
One thing we're very good at doing is droning on, as Karl eloquently put it. Also, we agreed that Karl was going first, but needless to say.
Okay, rock, paper, scissors with witnesses.
I
One, two, three.
Just organized my thing, Karl. You can't take the floor from me now.
Are you going to go?
What do you mean I'm going to go? I'm going right now.
I'm ready, so I'm going to go.
This is why the show almost failed several times.
More people like this. We just do this for 60 minutes every Sunday, in case you haven't listened to One Dish, One Mic. It's just Sean and I bickering about how the show is going to go.
Yeah, it's me trying to convince Karl on how he should properly participate in Canadian democracy and vote. Needless to say, he has yet to bite. And if his sister's here, I apologize in advance, Jennifer Dockstader. So I think one of the big things with One Dish, One Mic is we're very pro the concept of narrative sovereignty. And that concept in and of itself speaks to stories that are being told about Indigenous people. Oftentimes throughout history, stories have been told about Indigenous people without providing any context from Indigenous people. So they told stories about us without us. I mean, One Dish, One Mic, that is one of the things that we try to do. All of our guests, for the most part, have been Indigenous. And their stories, again, are from that Indigenous perspective. Now, that being said, I would not be doing my due diligence if I didn't provide this parental guidance. Karl, as we all know, likes to get crazy. Every now and then he likes to say things that are outlandish and may use the odd swear word. So parental guidance is advised. Also, Twilight, when we talk about narrative sovereignty, they have a white guy playing a native guy. That's not narrative sovereignty. So I figured for my opening slide, this is where we're going to go with. When we're talking about me and the views that I bring, I've come together I brought together this presentation, and I've entitled it "You're Racist," because Karl likes to say that I say people are racist. Karl also likes to say that I like to talk about myself, which he is not wrong. So my presentation is called "You're Racist," a story told by Sean Vanderklis featuring Sean Vanderklis. I hope you like it. The pictures in the back are screenshots of a Reddit thread that was specifically about me, and it talks about how I speak for all Indigenous people, so on and so forth. So I thought it was appropriate given Karl's perception of, or Karl's perceived perception of who I am. So a quick overview about me. So my name is Sean Vanderklis. I'm the son to Karen and Ron Vanderklis. They are these lovely people right here in the bottom left-hand corner. I like to say that I was born cool. So best picture to represent my coolness is this little picture right here. My mom and dad are going to be yelling at me for stealing all their pictures and family of photo albums. I'm the father of two, and more specifically, the father of these two, Nodin, Buck, and Neeb and Buck. They're my pride and joy. They're everything we do for our future generations, and that's them right there. Second or third of it is I'm a Anishinaabe, more specifically, I'm Mississauga. I'm from Curve Lake First Nations. However, I am also Dutch. So Sean Vanderklis, I'm Dutch and Anishinaabe. And most recently, I'm the co-host of a podcast, then broadcast, and now re-podcast, One Dish, One Mic. So above and beyond everything that we're going to talk about, if you want to know who is Sean Vanderklis, this is the slide to go to. But in order to understand who I am, you have to understand some of the issues that have affected my life. And one of the things that I like to do and talk about are things that have shaped my worldview, that have shaped my identity, that have shaped my politics, that have shaped everything that I am as a person. And these four things are listed here in, if you will, in chronological order. So being that I'm an urban Indigenous person, we grew up in poverty, right? That was, from my perception, that's the life that I lived. And from poverty, I ended up having to deal with compounded issues of isolation. And given that I was urban and Indigenous, I also faced things like lack of identity, and that lack of identity led to racism. So all these four things are things that I carry on my back at any given time throughout my life. When we talk about privilege, or if we talk about white privilege or any sort of privilege, what that privilege means is that your bag is going to be less empty than mine. So me and the things that I carry in my life is this: poverty, isolation, lack of identity, and racism. Again, it has defined who I am as a man, and it has shaped my view on the world. And it is the foundation for the politics that I preach and that I talk about on the show One Dish, One Mic. Karl, being the lovely drawer and animator that he is, has created a picture, and this is his interpretation of what it was like growing up like Sean Vanderklis. So I gave him a quick overview of my life, and he's like, perfect. You lived in a trailer park next to the White House and next to 124 Sussex Avenue. So what's that, 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue and 124 Sussex, between the president and the Prime Minister of Canada, which I think was a very good description. So one of the things I want to talk about is growing up poor. From my perspective, for the first couple of years of my life, was completely okay. It was completely fine. This is a house that I lived in for a couple of years of my life. I grew up in subsidized housing. I grew up in UNESA, Niagara Regional Homes. And for the first 3 houses that we lived in an area that was relatively the same. People were of the same socioeconomic backgrounds. People within these backgrounds or within these neighborhoods looked like me. So I'd go out and play with my friends. My friends were representative of who I was as an individual. They were diverse in background. They were relatively on the lower end of the scale economic wise, and we were all one and the same. But one of the issues that we faced as we progressed and as I grew up is that my parents became a little more successful. And as we became a little more successful, UNESA, Niagara Native Homes, made the decision to say, because you guys are so good at paying your rent and you're so good at taking care of our places, we want to move you on up. We want to put you into a new neighborhood. And that was fine, and that was fantastic, because the neighborhood we grew up in was beautiful. As you can see, this is, again, actual images of the houses that I lived next to and that we'd see on a daily basis. But in reality, though, this is the house that I lived in. And this house, again, fantastic house. But growing up from a lower income house and living in the context of where I was living at Port Weller at the time led to a glaring gap as to who I was. What this did, living within this neighborhood, it highlighted and reaffirmed the 4 concepts that I talked about: poverty, social isolation, racism, and the lack of identity. So again, from my perspective, and I apologize to my parents because I know they're listening, they're probably cursing at me, but from my perspective, that poverty was heightened given the fact that we lived in a predominantly upper class white neighborhood. I was the only non-white person within that neighborhood, with the exception of my neighbors 2 doors down. So out of a population of maybe 3,000 houses, 2 of us were visible minorities. Because in my head that we grew up poor, social isolation became to be a huge factor for us. Something as simple as going to play with my friends was virtually impossible. I'm not sure if anybody's familiar with the context of St. Catharines, but we lived right around the border of Niagara-on-Lake, right next to Happy Ralph's. So we'd have to cross that bridge, Lock 1, on Lakeshore Road to get over, to interact with people who went to school with me, who were of my age, so on and so forth. So because we grew up poor, that social isolation became a huge factor, right? And because it became a huge factor, that led to alienation on my part, on society's part, right? Growing up without creating friendships and without creating bonds with my peers led to me, again, being alienated. And once people realized that they could talk about or point out the fact that we were on the lower end of the socioeconomic status, then that only led to racism. People began to become more comfortable with pointing out the fact that not only was I poor, but that I was also dark skinned. and that my dark skin fundamentally did not fit a part of this neighborhood and that of this school and of this high school. So of my graduating grade 8 class, I was the only person of color that I can remember. Only person of color. I was probably the only person of color who also didn't have a car. When we went into high school, and going into high school, my school was relatively small, and we went into a larger school. So my school, my grade 8 graduating class was around 30 people. Going into grade 9, we had about 150 people. So of the 150 people, 30 of them were my peers. At that time, we were in the process of trying to fit in to a group that was already tightly knit and tightly formed, and it proposed some barriers that were obvious, right? There were 30 of us, there were 120 of other students who already had some sort of relationship, and as a result of that, that's when I really started to focus on the concept of racism and start to experience the effects of racism. People would say, "Well, you're black." And I'd be like, well, I'm not black. And like, but you are black. And that led to me questioning my identity, right? I knew that I wasn't black. I knew that I was at the time what I would often refer to as native. I'm Native American, I'm Indian, right? And like, well, what the hell? So are we allowed to swear? I don't know if we're allowed to swear. But they'd be like, what the heck is that? And I'm like, I don't know. I really don't. How can I effectively defend who I am as a person if I don't know who I claim to be, right? And this brings in the concept of the Niagara Regional Native Center. So shout out to all the friendship centers out there. Should there be anybody here, anybody watching, again, I appreciate the work that you do. When I grew up struggling with the concept of who I was as an individual, and that led to an identity crisis. It really led to me questioning where I fit in the world. And it wasn't until I walked through the doors of the Niagara Regional Native Center that I realized that I am not the only person like this. That when I went into this building, everybody was of the same socioeconomic status. Everybody in that center looked like me or had a story similar to my story. Everybody walked for the sake of for the lack of better terms, within my moccasins. Their life experience was very similar to my life experience. So what ended up happening is community building, right? It was nation building. It was a bunch of youth who were coming together, who were learning together and rising together and experiencing life together, right? We were, if you will, a bunch of misfits that really didn't belong. And that was the foundation of my quest to know who Sean Vanderklis was. That was the foundation of my quest to know about my background and of what it meant to be Indigenous, and more specifically, what it meant to be Anishinaabe. So that built my thirst for knowledge, knowing that I could go in there, count on the people, see the staff, listen to the like-minded youth, built my thirst of knowledge. And that thirst of knowledge then began to fill the glass of my identity, right? Once I started wanting to know more, then I started to understand what it meant to be an Indigenous man. And I started to understand what it meant to be an Indigenous man within the context of an urban setting. However, when people are learning the past histories of Indigenous people, one of the things that we need to acknowledge is that it is not a pretty story. The very concept of residential schools and the concepts of the 60s scoop and the concept of starlight tours and all these issues that Indigenous people have faced, I was learning for the first time in my life around the age of 14, 15, 16, 17. So as much as I was learning about who I was as an individual and what it meant to be an Indigenous man, I was also re-experiencing that pain of what my ancestors had gone through and what my grandma went through beforehand. So that led to obvious things such as anger and such as resentment. The first 2 years, the grade 8 graduating year, grade 9 graduating year, I couldn't tell you how many fights I got into. I wasn't as articulate as I am now. I wasn't as outspoken as I was then as I am now. I also wasn't as myself. I lacked the knowledge, I lacked skills to confine my messages. And the last thing and the only thing I could resort to was my broken internet. Can you hear me okay, Carl? Just give a thumbs up if you can hear me. Has been cutting in and out the whole time.
Yeah, it's a little bit choppy, but I can still hear you.
Okay. So I would just let me know if it cuts off. I am so sorry, guys. So violence became my answer. Not violence in the sense that I went out looking for, but in the sense that I was willing to defend what I thought was fundamental truths. That people should not have to face discrimination, and I shouldn't be alienated specifically because of the color of my skin. So grade 8, grade 9, I was suspended a handful of times. And that was pretty much my high school career. Post grade 9, I became more comfortable with my identity. I created those relationships that were forged at the Niagara Regional Native Center. I had a sense of community that I really felt as if I belonged to. And that happened again for 4 years, right around to the age of right around to the summer of 2004. So if anybody wants to know how old I am, 2004 is a grade 12 for me. And one of the hidden things that we don't like to talk about is a protest that happened at the Niagara Regional Native Center. And I don't want to get into the details of what happened. I don't want to get into the concepts of who was right and who was wrong. But this was the start of my activism, and this was the start of my political career, if you will. What ended up happening is that there was a protest, and the community was fighting with the organization itself. And that organization then responded with what was known as a trespass list. So if your name was on this list, you were no longer allowed to be on that property.
And we lost Sean for a second.
Yeah, looks like we lost Sean. Not sure
Is
what
it a
happened
coincidence
there.
is it a coincidence that he showed a picture of a police car and then all of a sudden he's not on the internet anymore?
Yeah, that was kind of odd there, but just hearing so far part of his stories and from a lot of similarities. But the one thing that I found that he was able to somewhat really kind of get connected in his teenage years and that, and like for someone like me as a 60 scooper. Didn't happen till later on in my life, but it's amazing, and I love listening to him so far. And whenever I need like political advice or anything like that, that's where I go with Sean, and he kind of helps me out. Him and his friends, very knowledgeable in that area, and it's here we go. It's always great to reach out to him. How you doing, Sean?
Well, the internet in St. Catherine sucks.
You left us on the cliffhanger.
So I am so sorry about that, guys. I don't know what happens. Ontario internet has been. So bear with me for 1 sec. I think I've mastered the whole concept of. No, I apparently have not.
Y'all get it.
Carl, can you
Yes, sir.
just
Yeah.
I saw the content. Carl, I sent you my presentation.
Yeah.
You want to pull it up? It's in our chat.
Yeah, just stall. Actually, you left us on a cliffhanger, Sean. So maybe you can build it up a little bit. The last thing you said, there were like cop cars rolling up to the center. There's fires in the parking lot. Can you fill us in on the fires and the cop cars? And I'll pull up the presentation while you provide a little context there.
Yeah, perfect.
Actually, one of the people in the chat said, "Don't mention the cops," and the internet will probably stay still. So maybe we shouldn't.
Yeah.
Well, cops are racist and the internet's racist. I'm sorry.
That's it. We're gonna be shut down.
And again, to be clear, we talk about pretty controversial things on the internet and on the radio. My job, or my interpretation of my job, is that I say it, Carl defends it. So it's easy for me to call it out. It's harder for Carl to defend it. Bear with me for 1 second. So at that time in my life, the Friendship Center and the Indigenous community was kind of at odds with one another. And again, there was a little bit of a disruption within the community. A trespass order was put in place at the Niagara Regional Native Center that prevented people from being on the property. The summer of 2004, from my perspective, is where the Native Center is where I lived. The community, doing what the community does, rallies together to support one another. And we did so in a manner that held peaceful protests on the Niagara Regional Native Center. We we camped in teepees, we camped in tents, we camped underneath the sun and underneath the stars for again, that entire summer. The AGM, shortly thereafter, this whole issue started, was my first entry into politics itself. Good job, Carl. So once the AGM happened, my goal at that time was fundamentally to get on board to create change. And once I became on board, like I was elected as a youth representative for the Niagara Regional Native Center, and once I was officially sworn in, if you will, I really just ran with the position. I then became a provincial rep to the Ontario Federation of Indian Friendship Centers, and then moving on to the National Association of Friendship Centers as the Ontario rep. A year into my term representing Ontario, I was elected the national president of the Youth Council. A year into that role in that position, I was then elected to the national executive. I was elected on the national executive of the National Association of Friendship Centers Board of Directors. And that really opened my eyes into politics. Carl, I think we're at the fire.
Is he there?
Oh, you need the next slide?
Carl, you're at slide 1.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Maybe it's my
Oh,
fault.
yeah. Oh, shoot. Okay. No, you're right. Aw.
Carl, this is embarrassing. We literally teach a class online, Carl.
I'm the backup teacher.
That's because you have the good internet, apparently.
How's that? Is that?
Yeah, perfect. So again, the community divide, that passion of that divide became my identity at that time. My dedication and my focus for me was more so to create change through structures that were already in place, through organizations such as the Niagara Regional Native Center via their board of directors, through the Ontario Federation of Indigenous Friendship Centers, formerly Indian Friendship Centers, and then the National Association of Friendship Centers. Do you want to move on? Next slide, if there is a next slide. I don't even know how many slides I did. And the next big thing that contributed to my identity was I don't know more. My participation at the higher level tables on governance was really that of being in board meetings, and it was really that of participating in government sanctioned events. So I essentially became part of the system, and I lost my identity and I lost my concept of my roots. And I don't know more was that was a catalyst that re-sparked my fire, that got me going into more of a grassroots approach. Again, being part of the national board, it gets to your head, right? Sitting at these national tables, riding in town cars to the airports, staying at these fancy hotels. You kind of get accustomed to that lifestyle, and I don't know more humbled me. It put me in a place that I needed to reconsider what my priorities were. And for those of you who aren't familiar with I don't know more, it happened around 2012, 2013. And it was in response to the Stephen Harper's omnibus bill that I'm getting text messages. Mom, stop texting me. I'm just joking. It was a response to Stephen Harper's omnibus bill that removed environmental protections for Indigenous people. And for whatever the reason, for whatever the cause, because the government has done so many worse things, this was a counterpeg of a motion for Indigenous people. We organized and put on demonstrations throughout the nation. In Niagara specifically, we held events at the Penn Center, we held events down the highway, the 420, we held events on Clifton Hill. And it was, again, another moment in Canadian history, and more specifically within the context of Indigenous people, that was a cultural resurgence and a spiritual resurgence. If you look at many of our thought leaders today, they can trace their roots back to Idle No More. When we talk about Wab Canoes and his time with CBC and the Eighth Fire, goes back to Idle No More. When we talk about A Tribe Called Red and all the work that they've done with banning the mascots and concepts of cultural appropriation, go back to Idle No More. Idle No More, again, was it for Indigenous people at that time. And this is where this is how I credit who I am today, was because of what was happening here. Karl, next slide, please. And then shortly after Idle No More, a couple years later, One Dish, One Mic was born. Again, Karl's fancy artwork right there is me dunking on John A. McDonald. And the first episode that we ever recorded was, again, I'm not sure if I'm allowed to swear, but I'm going to go with it. Who the Hell is Sean and Karl? It was recorded on March 11th, 2017, and it was released on March 17, 2017. The next big thing in my journey on One Dish, One Mic was being a guest on the roundtable on News Talk 610 CKTV. That really gave us an opportunity to participate in Niagara's community, right? Above and beyond, or even before this time, where we're at right now, Indigenous people were kind of segregated from the concept of participating in Niagara. We were seen as others. And for me, this was a huge awakening. Niagara was listening. Niagara gave Indigenous people a platform. Lynn Bayak, the infamous senator, was one of the things that stand out to me on my time with One Dish, One Mic. Colton Bushy, again, was another huge impact on me as an Indigenous man. Part of my life growing up in poverty was walking that fine line between right and wrong. Constantly blurring the boundaries of what is appropriate, what isn't appropriate. And when I hear about Colton Bushy, when I talk about Colton Bushy, I think of how different my life could have been if I was born in the same context that he was born, within the same time frame, within the same province and city, because our lives were virtually identical. The only thing is I was fortunately I was not I didn't have a racist farmer who was willing to put a gun to my head and pull the trigger. One of the other things that stand out to me is my time arguing and fighting with Brock University via Garth Stevenson. Garth Stevens. Is it Stevens or Stevenson? You know what the best part of me not remembering is? It just shows how relevant this gentleman is today. Regardless, he made some racist comments and we really took him to town. Brock University, let's give credit where credit due, responded appropriately, made immediate the text messages come up and it just catches me off guard. Brock University called a Senate committee meeting, immediately revoked his status, and then held a follow-up conference a month or so later to talk about the effects of Garth Stevenson. So this is my story, and it's to be continued, because now we're just getting into who One Dish, One Mic is.
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing, Sean.
Darcy, if you just want to narrate the comments for me, so maybe I can answer some.
No one wants to talk to you.
Is it because the police are racist?
Oh, I must have done it. No. Maybe they're just going to start getting ready. But the one thing actually I wanted to talk to you about, and you had mentioned about activism. I actually lived a life without not even thinking of activism. I guess within my mindset, survival mode, growing up and all that, it just never occurred to me. I was very assimilated. But what made me start getting into it and starting to learn more about it was actually when I was at Brock University.
Yeah.
And this is as early as 6 years ago that I really started to learn about my culture. And when I started learning about my culture, and then I started learning about the atrocities and the devastations, and even reading my story and someone's article, someone's paper, And that really brought some identity back to me. And then that's when I really started kind of voicing more of opinion and really raising my voice, and, really starting to learn more and, starting to become more active out in the community. And so it's, for some of us, it's new, but it's always what we learn. So
for me, it's about it's not that it's new, it's about when we realize. One of the things that we need to consider is that Indigenous people and as racialized people, we are born political. And whether or not we know it or we address it, the fact remains that it is going to come out at one point in our life. At one point in our life, we're going to realize the system was not built for Indigenous people. And at that same point in life, when we come to this realization, that's when we're going to find our voice. And again, we do this via demonstrations, via decolonizing institutions, via podcasts such as One Dish, One Mic, through events like what the museum is putting on right now. Again, it varies from person to person, but the one thing remains the same is that Indigenous people are born political.
We have people chiming in through Facebook as well. So Doug has been saying that, was talking about how the events you were talking about, Sean. He says, those events all woke me up. It clicked with his life being raised in Thunder Bay, which, if you haven't read Seven Fallen Feathers or had a chance to listen to Ryan McMahon's podcast about Thunder Bay, I think those are good starting points to understand urban Indigenous issues. I'm going to read Patty's comment here too. She's also weighing in through our Facebook chat, and our friend Patty Croc says, "Idle No More was like those flocks of birds getting ready to migrate, just swooping around and around, picking up more every time. It collectivized our identity in a way that I don't think urban Indigenous people have been collectivized." Powerful. Thank you for that contribution.
Yeah. I'm going to read a question from Joanne Fishburne. Really fascinating insights. Sean, early influences. It would be interesting to hear from Karl, his early influences and how that has informed his priorities and what One Dish, One Mic is for him. Well,
yeah, I'd be happy to.
Yeah, it's a good start. That's a good opening.
To put that into context, that's my boss saying, "Sean, shut up. Let Karl go."
Oh, geez.
Yes, Joanne.
There are some people here that I haven't met before, so I've been jumping in, but I'm going to introduce myself formally. Takakedos Nyangats, Wageskliwagi Niwagi Tilota, Anyataaga Ni, Hawatsadat Ni, Wakane Heladu, Gaika, Wanisladeci, and Vilgali, Wagatsuduni, G Wagadachade. That means my name is Karl. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. So I can't hear anybody, so I assume everyone's laughing.
You can't hear any responses.
Right? Even my family's actually in the room with me, and they didn't laugh either. So I know that joke just bombed. So yeah, thank you. Oh, now people are politely LOL. Thank you very much. My new favorite people are Liz, Julie, and Emily. Thank you. Everybody else. I'm just kidding. You're all beautiful, and I'm glad to have this opportunity to be here and look at Sean's hand while he checks his text messages. All right, I'll stop making jokes and actually get to something that resembles a presentation here. So I definitely did not give the exhaustive life scrape that Sean did. Everyone should be looking at my computer. Can you see my computer, Darcy?
Yep.
Perfect. So I grew up, and in case it wasn't obvious, I'm a gigantic comic book fan. Grew up, and I kind of realized in my adult years that comic books were a bit of an escapist thing for me. So we're not going to unpack Karl's childhood on the live internet tonight because my mom's here and and my sister's watching, and it would just get awkward. All that being said, actually, my mom and dad were rebels for sure, and I really value that about them. They both bucked the status quo in their own way, and they both decided that we were going to be determined as a family to continue our Indigenous ways of being moving forward. So I think that maybe that's something different that I have as an asset than a lot of other people, is that from an early age, it was impressed upon me that it's important to keep this stuff going forward, and don't believe the messaging in society that being Indigenous is amazing, it's important, and it will give you a rich history and a connection to the land. So as my mom and sister who are watching can also attest to, I got this great advice as a young person, and I said, I don't need that. I don't need any of that stuff. I'll go and try this colonization over here. So I went and I honestly, I rejected everything Indigenous, which is too bad, because I had great teachers growing up. I had good parents that loved me, and things at home weren't perfect. Again, I'm not gonna unpack all of that, but I honestly believe that my mom and dad in earnest, that they loved me and they invested in me, and they wanted me to be a happy person. And part of that was that they wanted me to see that my indigeneity was a part of that happiness. But I just didn't see it. So I said, you know what? I know everything. I figured out at a very young age that I had all of life figured out, probably in my teens. I'm like, yeah, I got this. I got everything figured out. So I went and I did it on my own. I did well enough in school that I could have gotten into college or university, but I said, no, I'm going to take a year off work. And if there's any young people out there listening, I don't recommend that path, because 1 year turns into 2 years, turns into 5 years, turns into you're going to school in your 30s. So be careful about that path. But I also wanted to maintain a certain kind of, it's weird because I'm here saying to everyone that I was rejecting my indigeneity and that I was embracing colonization. But I think that Darcy and Sean and other Indigenous people can all relate to the fact that you can never hide from your indigeneity. Like you can walk as far away from culture as possible. You can not learn language, not practice your ways, not acknowledge who you are. But it's going to follow you. And until you reconcile that internally, then I think there's always going to be a little bit of an imbalance. So I didn't even realize that while I was pursuing a colonized lifestyle and the Western mainstream value of success, that I was actually following in the footsteps of our ways. A prime example of that would be that I came out of high school and I limped through high school. It was 5 years at the time. We still had mandatory OAC. I was in one of the last years, and it took me 7+ years to get out of high school. So it took me a little while. I limped out of high school, and then I bumped over into a career, and that's a younger, skinnier version of myself, finding a sense of identity in the kitchen, and really enjoying working with my hands, really enjoying working with a new group of people. What I didn't realize at the time was that I'm Bear Clan. So when I gave my introduction earlier, I talked about, one of the things I said is that Dekakedos Niangats, sunrise is my name. And then I said, well, Gesklewage Niwage Telota Ni. I said, bear is the clay, the style of clay that I'm made from. What I found out later in life is that the Bear Clan, they are the cooks, and they are the ones that are responsible for the health and for the well-being of people. So here I am in this picture here, trying to hide and look all tough or whatever, and trying to avoid who I am. And it turns out that inside of that picture, in my beating heart and soul, is still my Indigenous roots and my ancestry and who I was. Further to that, my grandmother, who unfortunately went to residential school. Again, I'm not going to unpack a lot of that, but I am going to say that if you do read Seven Fallen Feathers, that Tanya Talaga gives an example of a dilapidated residential school, and she literally tells the story of how the bathrooms were so overflown for the students that they took buckets out into the barn, and that's where they relieved themselves. Like that's just one of a number of unsanitary conditions. She talks about the school, and the school that she talks about is the Mount Elgin School, and the year that she references is only a couple of years after my grandmother went there. So my grandmother went to residential school, and I think that's where maybe this idea that I needed to walk away from my culture and that this wasn't something that was important. I think that's where that seed got planted. But she always had a deep fondness for our ways. And she would always, I would find out later in my life, continue our responsibilities, right down to the fact that I got my love of cooking from her. She was a chef by trade, and I lived with her when I was stumbling a little bit, and I like to party, and I like to drink, and I like to do probably a lot of other things that my grandma shouldn't have known about. And but she told me, you know what, get into cooking and at least get this skill, because no matter what, people always have to eat. No matter what happens to the economy, you're always going to have this fallback, and you're always going to have this thing to go to. So I did. I got into cooking, and I took it pretty seriously. I was really lucky to have chef Etzo Di Domenico was one of the first chefs at it's now the Clarion in Fort Erie, but at the time they were a Holiday Inn, and they had fine banquets. Chef Ezio brought a lot of fine banquets and business there, and it piqued my interest in becoming a chef. I also benefited from the mentorship. There were a lot of positives. Still to this day, I'm passionate about cooking. I'm that guy that's been baking all through quarantine, different things. So and that all goes back to my cooking roots. So I got a lot out of it. But what they say about the level of drugs and alcohol in kitchens, to deal with a lot of the stress in kitchens, again, without naming names of the places that I've worked at, I would say the kitchens are maybe more tolerant to that type of behavior than others. Further to that, there's a lot of pressure to be successful and to move up the roster. So in my 20s, I said to myself, well, I'm going to get my first executive chef job by the time I'm 30. So I pushed myself, and I pushed everything aside. I pushed friends aside. I pushed family aside. When I wasn't in the kitchen, I had my nose in a book. When I didn't have my nose in a book, the internet had just sort of come out, to date myself a little bit. And I was learning everything that I could, and filling the void that I had with work, which again, at the time, that can work to a degree, but I was pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing. Finally, I got a job, and my friend Chef Roddy Fenner, who was the executive chef in Fort Erie, where I met him, and then was the longtime opening executive chef of the DoubleTree here in Niagara Falls. He was a mentor and a guide for me, and he let me know that there was a golf course in Coketown, just a quick 1 hour drive from Niagara Falls that I should check out. So I went and I took that job for the summer, and it's all I did, between driving to and from work and then spending 6 12-hour days, sometimes 7 days a week, sometimes for 14 and 20-day stretches there at work. I really left all of my blood, sweat, and tears in that environment. But I didn't manage the stress well. And the times, again, when I wasn't cooking and when I wasn't working my butt off, I was taking advantage of some of the overflow wine and some of the other benefits that existed, and I crashed and burned. We had a great summer, and we had some amazing weddings, and I really honed my banquet skills and did a lot. And at 28, 29 years to become a chef, I mean, that I'm pretty proud of having made that accomplishment by the time I was 30. But what they don't teach you when you're aspiring to become a chef is that leading a kitchen and being a good cook on a technical level are two totally separate disciplines. Leadership is like over here, and managing a crew and keeping everything orderly and organized is here. And then making amazing fine cuisine and understanding butchering techniques and baking techniques and all of the different things are a totally different skill set. So I still, if I had to do it all over again, I would have taken some time to focus on leadership and on self-management and on balance. But that, again, that's not what they market to for chefs. They're looking for young people that they can grind on through. So things didn't end the way that I hoped, but I'm still very grateful for my time at Coketown Woods. That was the very first executive chef job that I had. I'm very grateful that they took a shot on a young guy, and they gave me a chance to get them through a summer season. So it was a good experience, but it started to catch up with me. Next thing you know, I fell in love with a beautiful young woman that for whatever reason fell for me, and we went to chase our dreams in the city of Toronto. And one of my chef friends got me a job at the Courtyard by Marriott. It's hotel chefs sort of measure their success by the number of rooms in the hotel. So I went from working at a 200-room hotel to working at a 524-room hotel that had 2 separate wings to it. And again, full banquets, the full speed of Toronto. Again, lots of corporate stuff, lots of international food. Worked for Marriott. Again, they're a great company to work for, but the grind. I was working full time. Amy was working full time. We were picking up every hour that we could. And at the time, for reference, we had an apartment at Yonge and Eglinton, technically Roehampton and Mount Pleasant, if there's any Toronto people that are out there. And we were paying $1,300 for a 2-bedroom, which would be a steal in Niagara Falls. I think $1,300 right now would be a steal for a 2-bedroom. So that's what we were paying in Toronto. But at the time, the wages weren't as high, and we were working and working and working and working and working. And then all of a sudden, Amy got pregnant. We found out that we were going to have a baby, and that was it. We took an inventory of everything in late 2006 and early 2007 when we became pregnant, and we said, what are we doing here? What are we doing in this fast city and trying to have these hoity-toity careers? And I was in a management track. I had executive sous chef in front of my name at the time, again, at a big hotel. Amy was pursuing management in retail, and things on paper, by the Western metric of success, we actually were a very successful young couple. But what we realized is that what's more important than monetary success and that the material rewards that our careers would provide us is family. So we dropped everything as soon as we could. And I found the first job that I could get back in Niagara Falls, took a substantial pay cut. At the time it was manageable because the cost of living was a lot lower in Niagara Falls than it was in Toronto. And I came back and I tried again to make a go of things. But what ended up happening is that I've moved a lot in my life. I've lived in London, I've lived in Windsor, I've lived in Fort Erie, I've lived in Niagara Falls, I've lived in Toronto, I've lived in Mississauga, I've lived in Buffalo, I've lived probably in other places that I'm forgetting. One thing that happens when you move is that sometimes you think you're going to get a fresh start and that everything's going to change in this new city, new me type thing. And that's not what happened. My problems followed me, and I had a lot of demons, and it was tough. So I was lucky to get back into the executive chef game. Again, I got a job at a good sized hotel, and I had a lot of responsibility. Again, hadn't quite mastered leadership. So the way that I would make up for my leadership vacuum is I would just work doubles instead of actually getting people to do the work, sort of a basic of leadership. And I crashed and burned, and I ended up losing another job. I see my internet connection is breaking up a little bit. I hope you're still with me there. I ended up losing. Yeah. Okay. Good.
Yeah, we're with you.
Okay. Good. I ended up losing my job. And then I found another job right away, and they treated me really good. But then we got pregnant with our second child. We had Catherine. Everything was great. It was a life changer. Having kids for me really put my life into focus and put my priorities in order. But I was still drinking. I was still carrying on, and then eventually we had Amelia. When we were about to have Amelia, again, fever pitch of stress. Amy had taken on a full-time catering gig. I was an executive chef, working 60 hours a week. We had a lot of responsibility. We were trying to buy a house, and our house of cards really came crumbling down. Luckily, I have a great sister. I have a great mom. My stepbrother lived with me at the time. He found a wonderful spouse. My spouse has wonderful parents. There were a lot of people that really kept us. I'm really mindful of how close I came to losing everything in the stress and in the trying to run away from my own barriers and my own problems. So I did end up losing my job again, picking up another job after that. I had great supportive employers. But then when Amelia was being born or on her way, it turns out that there's this thing called paternity leave. And if mom can't take maternity leave, then dad gets to take paternity leave. And I didn't even know about it. People were like, yeah, you should just like, when you have a kid, you should just like not go to work for some time and take some opportunity to raise your kids. And so that's exactly what I did. I took some time off, and it was life-changing. I quit drinking when I was away from the stress of the kitchen. Quit cold turkey. I don't touch the stuff anymore. No dope, no cigarettes, no judgment to anybody out there that still indulges. But I had my moment of clarity, and that was a catalyst for me. I really, when I finally had that clear-headedness and took those mind changers out of the equation, then I could see my life clearly. And what I saw was that I had everything I needed. I have still to this day, I have a beautiful wife. I have 2 healthy daughters. I have a family that loves me, and I live in a good city here, Niagara Falls, and I got a lot of opportunity. And once I took those self-imposed barriers away, then I started to take stock of what was important. And I went back to school and refocused things. And in the course of going back to school, I started to see the world around me. And I feel bad because we're doing this event, and it's the Niagara Falls Museum. And here Sean and I are sharing all these pictures of St. Catharines, and Darcy's story. St. Catharines is such a big part. And we could probably list like all the people in St. Catharines that have helped us. And now here I am showing Montebello Park. But I'm showing Montebello Park because this is a picture that I drew of, again, this isn't about me, and this isn't about something that I personally did. This was back in the winter of 2014. Sean talked about it, I don't know more, so I'm not going to revisit all of that. But in the winter of 2014, the women in our community were demanding that they stop being invisible. Some information had come to light that over 700 women had gone missing and been murdered, and those cases were unresolved. As the fever pitch raised, it turned out that it was actually over 1,000 cases. And now here we are today. We don't even know how many missing and murdered Indigenous women that are invisible. So I'm showing Montebello Park because I was asked to organize my first event that I organized as a community event. And when I organized that event, that's when it became clear that this wasn't going to be important. This issue that mattered so dearly to me and to my mom and to my sister and to my wife and to my girls and to my grandmother and to my aunties and to me and to all of the men in their lives. This issue that mattered to us so much, it wasn't just going to resolve itself. It wasn't just going to, no one was going to, by goodwill, just wake up and say that we're going to address this issue. So we as a community put our foot down, and we had hand drumming, we had speakers, I met Laura Yep for the first time at this event. She's going to come into our story a little bit later. But I didn't even know what I was doing, but I knew that as long as I had my community at my back, and as long as they were willing to help me out, that I was going to be able to do this event. I'm also sharing this because this is the first time that I ever publicly gave a Thanksgiving address. And at the time, I just had it on cue cards, and I was just fumbling through and just learning it. But for me, this was a real catalyst of change, the things that happened at Montebello Park. Because what we believe is that when you give a Thanksgiving address, is that you're bringing everybody's minds together in a good way. And sometimes the speaker will say, I'm doing this on behalf of the other people. But when I gave the Thanksgiving address that day, when I brought everybody's minds together, I brought my mind truly into the collective. I took my scattered thoughts and my dreams of being a chef and my love for pork and all these other things that seemed to be important for me, my taste for fun craft beers and my goals of glory and financial gain and everything else. And when I had this event, I could see what mattered to people. There were people that got up, and I'm not going to share their story because it's not my story to share. But there were women that got up and they shared that they had lost everything. Everything. They lost it all. And they were still willing to go in front of 50, 60 people. I don't know how many people were there. It was freezing, so it was probably smaller than we hoped, but these women had lost everything. And they were still willing to go and to share that story and to put their heart and soul in front of people and to say that this is important, even though I lost my loved one, and even though I would rather grieve in private, that in the memory of my lost loved one, I want you people to do something. Do something. Care about the people that are in front of that have lost their lives. Care about the people that are missing. Somebody loved every single woman, girl that went missing. And I just want you to do something. I saw that today. And when I brought our minds together, then I joined my mind with the minds of those people who still are doing a lot of work and still have a lot of things to move forward on. So I really, that for me was a cataclysmic shift. And that's where I finally realized that this is what I have to do. It doesn't matter. I don't care what job I have, what my title is. I'm not, even though, you know, there's some things that are happening with the show and everything that are good. That's not what it's about. Another teaching we have that's in line with bringing our minds together is that we as a community are only doing as good as the person in our community that's struggling the most. I wish that non-Indigenous people would adopt this teaching. Look at our communities. I live downtown. I'm looking out and I'm looking at a numbered street as I look out the windows right now. And I wish everybody in Niagara Falls would adopt the mentality that we're only doing as good as the people in the city that need the most. And that's a teaching that day I adopted for our community. But that's something that I wish everybody would get to. I'm not going to stop until I believe that our people, who there are plenty of people that are in need and plenty of people that need lots of things, but I'm going to work with the members of my community and the non-Indigenous members of our greater community to do everything in my power to help those ones that need the help the most and to try to bring everybody back to the same level. And so those are some of the things that I saw that day. But another, and this is the last thing that I'm going to share, this is the last personal part of my story, is that, again, I was still studying the Untitled language on my own. At the time of this event, I think I was selling solar panels for Albert Zappatelli. I love that guy. He took a chance on me out of college, and go get some Zappy's piece after this, because I'm really grateful that he gave me the shot coming out of college. But it's still, you know, he's still a capitalist at the end of the day, and I was still working in the private sector, and that was sort of the priority was to make some money that day, and I realized that the need of the individual is the paramount need in capitalism. And until I learned how to work with other people, until I learned how to work on it in a team, in like a collective that brought this group together, the many wonderful people that brought this group together, that I wasn't going to be complete. Fortunately, I have the assets to remind me of what a solid team is around me, and so that's what I did was that I bring my family everywhere. And this is myself and my eldest Catherine and my youngest Amelia, and I finally did all the people that were in there. But I realized that where I go, they go. Where they go, I'm gonna go. Where my community goes, I'm gonna go, and we're all gonna go there together. So this is where I finally realized that we need to take these steps together. We need to work together as much as possible, and I think that I finally gained that skill. I was gifted that Kastoa in another picture. I've drawn myself wearing the traditional headdress of the United People, which is 2 feathers up and 1 feather down. It's actually behind me in the picture. I was gifted that as a reminder of my responsibility to try and take on these responsibilities. So at this moment in 2008, I was working with, I finally moved over to the Florida Native Friendship Center, which, I'm sorry, they're just crushing it. They're just doing such a good job these days with everything that they apply themselves to. And I work for this phenomenal organization. I worked for them at the time. They created a video of this event, raised awareness, talked about our border crossing rights, talked about the things that matter to us, but also that's when I became really part of the team. And ever since then, I'm loving it. I found my peace and I found my balance. And it's because it's because our minds have come together as one, and that gives me the peace that I need. So that's my personal story. How that transitions over into the next part of what we're going to talk about is that for a while I became a go-to, and just like Sean, Tom McConnell is one of the senior people. He's a host on 610 CKTB. He's also in charge of their programming, and he pulled me into his show, where I was on the radio with Laura Yip for 2 years. Every other Tuesday, we would be on the noon 30. And to compare and contrast her battles as a feminist fighting for the rights of politicians and for women representation in political leadership structures, and fighting against the structures of misogyny, and then comparing my battles against racism and the things that happen to Indigenous people. I had this really great growing opportunity. I met this really cool guy. Not that guy. I met this cool guy. Now here's a picture of me. No, just kidding. I met this other cool guy. And people wanted to hear what we said, and it's still to this day, there's more parts to this story, but it's still to this day kind of like baffles me. Like, you want to hear from little old Karl, and you want to hear from wild Sean, and they do. So we made a go of it, and now here we are today. So that's my personal story. I definitely unpacked a lot more than I intended. I only made like 3 slides, but that's my deal.
Well, that was awesome, Karl, and thank you for sharing. And you know what? That's what makes it great for both of you. Is you know, you're such different, and your views are much different, and that's where the collaborative comes in. And you know, you could challenge each other, and you learn from each other, and it's pretty awesome. And thank you so much for sharing. That was great. Just want to reach out to our audience and see if anyone has any questions. If they want to really step in and start engaging, that would be great. There was a question that came a little bit earlier from one of our viewers on Facebook, and they're talking about your fellowship with CBC. What are you hoping to get out of your fellowship at CBC?
So before we, I guess, touch base on that, fun story is that I applied for the fellowship without Karl even knowing. And that like it was really just a shot in the dark. And yeah, like one day in class while I was teaching and while I was working, I got this message from Karl, and Karl said, "You need to check your email right away." And they announced that we were the recipients of the 2020 Canadian Journalism Foundation's CBC Indigenous Fellowship. And for us, like, I don't know that we've always considered ourselves journalists. I think like we see our role in society as promoting and giving Indigenous people the platform to have their stories told. When my opening talk was on narrative sovereignty, and that's really what it's about, is that if we're going to participate in Canadian society, and if stories are going to be shared, they should be shared from the perspective of Indigenous people. You're not going to talk about us without talking to us. I mean, and ideally, if we're going to be talking about Indigenous people, they need to be told by us. So for me, with CBC Indigenous, we are going to Winnipeg. We don't know when. We don't know. We have no real timeline in place because of COVID right now. However, the goal, I guess, is to harness some of the skills to learn from people like Leonard Monkman, ideally would have been Wabagishik Rice, but he unfortunately has resigned. His position is on to bigger and better things. But learn from.
We were coming.
Sorry?
You heard we were coming and he resigned.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I was like, oh, shoot. And I guess one of the other things, too, is to bring that urban perspective, right? Again, I can't credit friendship centers enough. I am who I am because of friendship centers. And one of the lost people within the context of Canada is people who live off of reserve. And I think this is what makes our show unique. I think this is what makes our perspective unique, is we have 2 friendship center babies sitting here demanding that you listen and that you pay attention. So for me, it's about taking advantage of the opportunities that are going to be presented.
Yeah, I definitely want to jump in on the fellowship a little bit. I didn't know that Sean had put us in for this award. So I was a little surprised that we got it. The reality of the situation is, though, that as much as I want to tout how awesome Sean and I are, which I do think we take our job seriously. We put many hours of effort into One Dish, One Mic on Sundays. But the other thing that I realize is what a vacuum there is for Indigenous journalism and
So for me, it's about taking advantage of the opportunities that are going to be presented. Sorry, I'm messing up technology. My apologies. I'll just mute my microphone now.
There's a vacuum. There's a vacuum. But it's not just in the Indigenous community. I mean, we've learned this week that Black perspectives are very much underrepresented in media, and it's terrible that it takes the loss of life of Regis in Toronto and of Mr. Floyd in the States. It's terrible that it takes the loss of life for us to take notice of something. And then when it comes to missing and murdered Indigenous women, we don't even care about the loss of life. The report was supposed to come out last weekend. The actual plan of action from the federal government was supposed to come out last weekend. And they're saying because of COVID-19 that it's being suspended indefinitely. Come on, I was a student. There's lots of excuses for not doing your homework. But this excuse is hooey. I'm going to say hooey because I can't say stronger words because I want to be nice to the museum and I don't want to get them in trouble. But it's not cool that this isn't ready. So one of the things now is that Sean and I, we have a responsibility now that we have this spotlight. It's not about Sean and it's not about Karl. It's about looking at the things that are happening in our community and in shining a light on the darkness so that people can see what needs to be done. And that's what I hope we take away from our opportunity in Winnipeg if we ever get to go, if it's not like a Skype fellowship.
Well, yeah, that's amazing, and that's kind of when I have opportunities, put events on that kind of stuff, and I hear 100% on what you're saying on at least bringing light to the community, to the broader and wider community, for education on stuff. What you mentioned, what it takes and what's going on if someone gets murdered, or whenever it takes a big event is normally what brings everything into light, and it's extremely. It has, unfortunate that it has to get that way for people to really start thinking and to kind of really open up their mind for change, and but really kind of what we really see out there is the lack of education on what's actually going on. It's a whole system that will eventually it's going to have to change, right? For us to really make headway, and so many different areas will change the whole system completely, to be honest. But and that's where I really like listening to you guys speak, because also you guys teach me a lot too. And you guys are like my go-to guys if I need any help or if I'm not understanding anything. I call you guys up because because you guys are amazing men and amazing leaders in our community, and and I think that's something that we continue on doing, and then we just keep more empowering ourselves and educating each other.
Yeah,
I was just want to say something.
Yeah, just a quick comment. I don't I love you, Darcy. But to me, it's not a lack of education. It really isn't. It's about willful ignorance. Society, I mean, the issues that we're facing aren't new issues. Before George Floyd, there were hundreds of people who have died, right? And this is it. We need to stop. We need to stop saying things like, "Well, I just don't understand." Well, you don't understand because you're not looking and you're not reading, right? You choose to live in this bubble of ignorance, and you choose to only see the things that are directly in front of you. And if you're living in the nice places in Niagara Falls, the things that are directly in front of you are not the realities of Indigenous people and not the realities of urban people. But again, I go on rants and tangents, so I'm just going to stop there. So thank you, Darcy.
Yep, absolutely.
Any questions? So I'm not sure how this works. I'm on Facebook, so I can field any Facebook questions. Karl, do you want to take any chat questions?
I think so. I can't screen share.
Well,
I can't screen share.
I'm keeping an eye on the Q&A. So if anyone on our Zoom would like to ask any questions or anything like that, please on the Q&A, you could write a question that you would like that, or that you would want to bring up to chat about. Please type in, and we'll bring them up to Sean and Karl.
Yeah.
Sorry to cut you off, Karl.
Yeah, I wish Patty just left. Patty just left the Facebook chat, which is too bad because I wanted to pull her picture up there. And actually, she's joining us on Sunday. The 40-year Native Friendship Center wrote a letter about about solidarity between Black and Indigenous communities. Also, Patty is organizing an event on June 20th where everybody will have an opportunity to follow proper social distance protocols, but to participate and to actually do something. And if that, I mean, that's something that if One Dish, One Mic ended tomorrow, which I don't think it's going to. It looks like things are going really strong for us and we're getting a lot of opportunity. But if it ended tomorrow, then I would know that we've had an opportunity to affect our community. But for everybody that's listening right now, what I would say is that all of you have that opportunity to affect your community too. So it's no good if Sean and I just give ideas, and if you walk away from your screen and you go, well, that was a nice presentation and I like those guys, or I didn't like those guys, or whatever that may be. But the thing to do is to go and to take it into action. Darcy and I have been on the board together. Sean and I have worked on projects together. Clark, who's listening, has done a lot to advance the community. A lot of the people watching, I know personally from community engagement and from taking these ideas and putting them out into reality. Sorry, I'm getting really ranty. So you better ask questions or else I'll just go on
Yeah.
players.
Okay, so we do have questions coming in. So
Yeah.
I got one here that says, I'm not sure who it's from, but what do you like about radio versus podcasting?
Radio, I like that you get to see the raw, uncut version of Sean and Karl. That what you're seeing is truly a reflection of where we are in that moment. Our passion is captured. It's raw, uncut, unfiltered emotion. Podcasting, on the other hand, I get the freedom to say what I want. No censorship. So that is always the plus, right? There's pluses and benefits to both, right? The biggest issue that I think we run in with radio is just how user-friendly it is. It's not the most user-friendly method of listening to our talks.
Okay.
You know what I thought? There's other questions, so I don't want to linger on this one too much. But one big difference that I've noticed is that I think we're speaking primarily to non-Indigenous people on the radio, and in the podcast, I think it was more of a community like event, and I really miss having like my sister on an intimate level. The chats that we had with you, Darcy, on there on an intimate level, when we would have like Alyssa General on there, like I felt like we were creating a community asset primarily for our community. We still do, and I'm really grateful to the Indigenous people that support our show, but we're speaking primarily to a non-Indigenous audience, and it's different and it's fast, and sometimes the texts come in and they sting. Like when someone sends in a text and says your show is garbage, or I need to know when not to listen, or how could you talk about racism, like it stings because we're just casting that much of a wider net. We're still going to keep doing it, but okay.
Okay, it looks like we might have just enough for a few more questions. I have one here that says, can either of you speak to your experience of installing pride and being Indigenous in your children as you raise them?
Yeah. For sure. I did not grow up with that cultural pride, right? I didn't have that sense of identity. I didn't know where I fit into what it meant to be Indigenous. And for the most part, I kind of shied away. When people made these accusations, I knew if I were to defend myself, that defense would fundamentally result in fists being thrown. Now, on the complete flip side, my children wear their indigeneity. Darcy, you should mute your mic, dude.
Oh, sorry.
Hear you coughing and humming and hawing. My children wear their indigeneity like a badge. They do. My son's hair is long. He has we call it powwow bling that he wears on it all of the time. He walks around, sings. When we're driving in the car, that music is blared as loud as any other music you can imagine. We grew up. The mother of my children and I wanted to make sure that they stood taller than we ever could. And that was really the foundation of all the successes in my life. Had them being able to be unapologetically Indigenous is my greatest success. Karl?
I echo that. Our kids are the same age, and especially with school being out, we've really been taking an opportunity to learn and to grow. They're here, so I'm not going to show them because they're like in their PJs and stuff. I was gonna turn the laptop around and be like, I'll tell you how much my kids are in my life. They're right here, but I'm not going to do that to them. So
Okay.
yeah, it's important.
All right. I guess we got like about 5 minutes left. We got another question. Any ideas to help change views of older white privileged men? Weren't prejudice ideas on Indigenous people? What?
I'm going to jump in. I'm going to say this, that what I wish I would have realized sooner, but what I've realized in the last week and a half is that we need to stop waiting for the people. We need to stop putting all our energy in the people that aren't moving at the same speed as us. So we need to figure out who the people are that are doing the anti-racism work, and we need to work with those people. That's where we need to put the energy into. So I'm sorry if there's old white men or old white women or even honestly people that are close to me that aren't going to come along. I'm tired of wasting that energy that I could be putting into my besties, Darcy and Sean, and putting that energy into people that aren't ready. So move on is my advice.
Yeah. I mean, the concept of you can lead a horse to water, but you can't force them to drink is relatively true, right? Like people's aha moments come at very specific times in their life. And again, our people are dying. Like it's that simple. Our people are fundamentally dying, and I don't have enough time or patience to sit here and educate a person who just refuses to say Indigenous people are people, right? So I'm sorry, but bye. One of the questions I'm seeing on Facebook is, of all of your guests on your radio show / podcast, which person really inspired you?
Darcy.
Yeah. Oh, thanks, guys. But you know what? That's one amazing thing about your podcast is you bring on such amazing community members, leaders in our community, and you have the opportunities to really kind of pick their brain and hang out. And it's pretty awesome. And what's even better, what's even more awesome is all these amazing Indigenous leaders in our community that are actually making their way onto your show. And you bring them to Niagara, which is awesome. Well, not while COVID's on, but yeah, and it's 8:27, so we're gonna really kind of shut it down now. I really want to thank everyone else that joined us on this Zoom, as well as on Facebook. Thank you so much for coming out and to listen to hear Sean and Karl. They're amazing men, and I'm glad that I get to really call them my brothers. And it's like some of the words that we had mentioned earlier. There's a lot of work to do, and we'll just keep working hard. The one thing, don't forget, if you don't know Karl and Sean, or if you're not listening to their One Dish One Mic, please listen to the One Dish One Mic radio show, AM 610 CKTB, 10 o'clock Sunday mornings. And they have some great discussions and listen to, as well as their guests. Also, please join us for next week. The Four Direction series presents Brian Kahn. Brian is a leader within the Métis Nation and within our local community here in Niagara. He's going to do, speaking of his self-discovery as a Métis man, as well as art and storytelling. And as well, you could also check out our new empathic traditions, Niagara Indigenous Legacy. Explore the collection on the Niagara Falls Museum.ca site. And, we're starting to put more up there, and we have 3 more directions that we are going to cover for the rest of this month. And he also mentioned about Patty's event that's coming up on what day is that, Carl?
June 20th.
You can hear all the details this Sunday morning at 10:33 when she joins Sean and Carl on The Voice of Niagara, One Dish, One Mic at AM 610 PKTV. Listen at 10:05. Pat will be on later.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for joining us. We're signing off. Have a great night.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye. Love you guys.
Thank you, Museum.
So do we leave? Are we still being recorded?
I'll just stay. I'm having fun, so I didn't know how hard the stop time was.
Yeah. Well,
There was a food sovereignty. There was a food sovereignty question.
Yeah. Do you want to go on Instagram or
Can
Facebook
we?
Live?
We can go on Facebook. Yeah. If anybody wants to follow us over to our Facebook page, we'll figure out how to go live.
Unless the Niagara Falls Museum wants to continue.
Let's just keep talking until they shut it down.
What happens if there's nobody here? Maybe we're just gonna be us talking to each other.
Oh yeah, there's just 9 people, so everyone left.
Let me see. Close.
Actually, I
Hi,
think my
guys.
dad's line. Oh hi. Oh darn, you're gonna make us late.
It's on Facebook.
That was great. Thank you so
It's
much.
still on Facebook, okay?
We're still live, it says.
I'm working on it.
Yeah, we're still live. We still have 8 participants, 7 participants.
I should have done it in front of everyone, but I want to thank Laura Martin is here, and we work closely with her. They actually gave us an opportunity at the library. Oh, she just signed off when I thanked her. So never mind.
He's like, my job is done.
Right?
I'm just joking. We love Laura Martin.
Yeah, we really do. We're lucky that Niagara Falls has assets and they're willing to support us. So thank you.
Okay, I'm working to turn this off. Use that.
All right, we'll actually stop now.
Do it here.
Yeah, you must be able to do it there.
I can.
Darcy's calling me right now.
No, that's recording.
This is One Dish Room Mike. How do we use technology?
I want to thank Patty again. She just logged into the Facebook. So it's funny, she signed off and we literally started talking about her. So unless she checks the tape, she'll never know what we said about her.
Well, thank goodness for that. Delete the tape. She says, are you guys still talking on Facebook?
Can you turn off Facebook from there? Oh, yeah, too. Yeah.